You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a special live broadcast of Ask a Gettysburg Guide. What are we on? 35, I think this is.
Something like that. We're up there.
Yeah. Why is it a special live broadcast? Because as soon as it's finished, it's going away. You'll never see it again.
We're going to delete it.
Yes. And we're doing it just for the fun of it, to have a little fun with you guys. It's here on the East Coast, it's dinner time for a lot of people, so I'm not expecting a lot. But it's just practice for us with the live shows and whatnot. Today we're talking about, what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about myths, myth busting. And for those of you who've been listening for a long time, if you'll recall in the pre-COVID days when Bob was on, and Tim Smith would come on a lot, and Tim would ruin something for Bob that Bob had been talking about and telling on tours for 30 years.
Like every episode, too.
And he would get so upset.
Crushed Bob's hopes and dreams.
And Bob has now quit being a guide because of it. No, he has not. Anyway, we decided, since Tim is so good at busting these myths, we would ask our patrons over at patreon.com what myths they've always wondered about and heard about and wanted to know about and all that jazz. And that's what we're going to do today. So don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, to follow us on Facebook. You already do. Instagram, YouTube, and make sure that you have your notifications turned on for when these live videos become more frequent and real. Also, if you use the Apple Podcast app, please give us a 5-star review. Reviews, liking, sharing, subscribing are the best ways to help us grow our audience. So let us welcome today our guest, the one and only Tim Smith. Hello, Tim.
Hi.
It's been a while since you've been on.
Yeah, it's been a couple months.
Yeah, it has. How's your winter been?
Good.
Yeah, nothing exciting?
Nothing exciting at all. We're basically guides are not guiding at the moment. I mean, we are on our basic winter schedule anyway. Yeah. And then with COVID and the lack of visitation and the limited hours of the visitor center, there's not much guiding going on. I actually have, occasionally I guide on a Saturday. So I've done a few tours here and there. Yeah. But that's about it. And mostly I've been working at the Adams County Historical Society, where I'm the historian, and we've been pulling together artifacts and trying to get a story together for our new museum. So when we build our historical society, we're going to have a new museum, and of course there's going to be a large amount of information on the civilians during the battle in our museum, along with the rest of Adams County history.
And there's a way people can help by donating to the cause, right? How can they do that?
Well, they can, the main way is to get on our website, achs-pa.org. You can just Google Adams County Historical Society Gettysburg, and our homepage comes up, and we have a link to donate to the cause, and it's going to happen. So we're early in a few weeks, actually, we're going to have a groundbreaking. And over the course of the next year, we'll be building the new facility. And so, we're hoping to be open in like the, 2022. We'll see how it goes.
How much do you need? How much are you trying to raise, I guess?
Well, it depends. There are different levels that we're trying to achieve to raise for the historical society. And we're pretty far along in our money raising, but we have a lot more to go. I think the total cost of everything is going to be something like $8 million.
Okay. All right. So, well, Veronica, you've got that in the car, don't you? Yeah. Yeah. So maybe you can don't give them all of it, but give them some if you got it. All right. Well, all right. So go to what is it?
achs-pa.org.
-pa.org, and you can donate to them. All right, so we're talking about myths today. And normally, ladies and gentlemen, on these shows, we have the guide give us a background as to the topic at hand, but this is a multi-topic show. There's not one particular topic that we're talking about. So what we're going to do is Eric and I have something that we've been talking about for a while. Veronica's got a question. We're going to talk to Tim about those, and then we're going to take our commercial break and come back and do the people's questions. And maybe as a special treat, we'll let the people watching, if they're still alive and awake, at that point, they can ask a couple questions too. It's a special treat. But Tim, the other day, Eric and I, we were doing one of these, right?
Yeah, we were. We were doing a live stream in here about the state of the show.
And someone asked about... No, actually, we were talking about this before. But the point is, with the subject of blood drain holes in the floors came up.
Oh, yeah.
And every place has them. But something to Eric and I smells fishy about that. And Eric said, this sounds to me like one of those Gettysburg myths that tour guides like to tell over the years, and it's just become fact. What do you know? What do we know about this?
Well, I mean, there are different places around that claim to have blood-stained floorboards. And I think, it's one of those stories that comes from, some fact. I mean, obviously, buildings around town were used as hospitals, and obviously men who were wounded bled onto the floor. Mm-hmm. And so blood did get onto the floor. I think it's really difficult to point to something and say that's a bloodstained floorboard. And, I talked to different people, and they've done tests. They use luminol. And
well, we're not talking about blood stains. We're talking about the holes drilled to drain
because
the blood.
The blood is so deep, you need to drill holes in the floor.
That's what I said.
Right.
To get to,
sloshing around in knee-deep blood.
I remember that Greg Coco, who was a good friend of mine, he's since deceased. Mm-hmm. He was in a documentary for Civil War Journal with when Danny Glover was the host.
Sure, yeah. Saw that the other night too.
And he did one that was about civilians, and I remember him saying in it that sergeants were standing knee deep in blood. And I think he meant to say that they had, blood is splattered up to their knees on their pants legs or something, but no, he said they were standing knee deep in blood, and then they had to, drill holes in the floor to drain the blood out. I think it's just a little bit over the top there. I have never had anyone point to a hole that was drilled in the floor and say that was there.
Oh, I have.
Okay.
I've had people say that, I won't say where because it's a business, but there's a barn associated with this business, and there are holes in the floor, and they say, oh, well, they drilled them there to drain the blood.
I would suspect the holes were drilled so that they could put a rod or a peg through to, connect the floor to a joist. That seems to me like the...
Well,
what about just a knot that drops out over time?
Yeah.
We talked. I've got a...
But the holes always look too perfect. They look, you know what I mean? They're not, not holes. They don't always look perfect.
And why wouldn't you have somebody come with a mop and just mop it up? Why would you?
Or why don't you throw down sawdust or sand or dirt or something to sop it up and then just sweep it out?
Get a squeegee.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems.
Squeegee.
It seems, and let's say you drill a hole in the floor. Where's the blood going then?
Well, it's just going in the basement.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now all your stuff in your basement.
I don't blood in the basement.
And the Army's not going to do it because the Army's not going to be like, oh, let's think about these people's floor, drill holes. And the people who live there probably aren't there to do it.
Well, let me bring up another thing about the blood stains that bothers me. Okay, so let's say there's blood stains on the floor.
Yeah.
And let's say in a barn, for instance, and let's say that someone goes to the trouble and does some kind of test and it appears to be blood stains. How do we know it's not like, how do we know they didn't slaughter cows in their barn?
Exactly.
And blood stain on a floorboard, I hate to be maybe a little over the top here, gross, but what would they do?
Don't worry about it.
Women had children and there was afterbirth splattered all over the place. I mean,
it's a fact of life right there.
How do we know that these stains on the floor are actually from soldiers who were wounded, who are bleeding onto the floor?
There's a lot of other things that occur in life that could cause blood stains on the floor, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And not just the Battle of Gettysburg.
That's right. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for instance. But one of my memories is that the Gettysburg Times in the 1990s did an article on the George house and where John Reynolds died. And the article was about Colonel Jacob Sheeds, a local historian and school teacher, pointed to a spot on the floor and said when he was a little kid, someone told him that was General Reynolds' blood, and the stain could still be seen on the floor.
Okay.
And I happen to have the claims file for the George house, which mentions that there were 13 wounded soldiers in the house. How do we know that stain is from General Reynolds and not one of the other 13 soldiers?
Exactly.
So I think the whole concept is replete with problems in a general sense.
Yeah. All right, that makes sense to me. Now, Veronica, what was it that you were talking about? Grab this mic over here and tell us what you had going. Get right up to it. Don't be shy. You can grab those headphones if you need to as well.
I think I'm good. Can you guys hear me?
No. Yes, we can.
Okay. So, Tim, being new to the area, I sometimes hear folks that are claiming that there are not only Confederate burial trenches, which we know there are, or at least locations, but that there are still known Confederate soldiers buried in those trenches. Is there any truth to that? And if so, if they were known to have been there, why were they not reinterred somewhere more proper?
Yeah, well, it's a multifaceted question. And I should preface it by saying that, my knowledge of the answers that I'm giving to these questions isn't from, a lot of times we'll go ahead of time, get all the questions, and then we'll research and come up with some solid facts to support our answers. But it's just that I've been asked these questions over and over again, hundreds, if not 1,000 times by tourists, So I'm sure that, there's no question I would be asked that I hadn't heard before. So these are more of my, the things that I've thought about over the years in answer to these questions that come up. Mm-hmm. And in a general sense, I think a lot of people are surprised to hear this, but there are still soldiers buried around the battlefield. And you probably know that all the Northerners were eventually buried in our National Cemetery, and Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. But officially, there were no Southerners buried in our cemetery. They were left on the battlefield. And it wasn't until about 7 or 8 years later that they started the attempt to gather Southerners from the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the problem with that is the bodies had already been out there for 10 years. A lot of the markers where soldiers are buried, especially in trenches, they weren't there anymore. The markers had been knocked over.
Right.
And so even if there is a trench, did they dig all around the trench? Are they sure they got everybody? And I think most people will tell you if you count up the number of soldiers, Confederate soldiers that had been moved from the Gettysburg battlefield to cemeteries, the existing cemeteries like in Richmond or North Carolina or Georgia, and you add up the number of Confederates we believe should be killed and be buried on the battlefield. Now that's an iffy thing because some guys probably died in hospitals in Harrisburg or hospitals in Baltimore, hospitals in Philadelphia. So, but if we add up the number of dead we think should be able to be located and the number that were located, the difference is about 1,000.
Okay.
So I think it's safe to say that there are hundreds of bodies still buried on the battlefield, and at the high range, maybe 1,000 still buried somewhere around the field. And immediately after the battle, of course, they plowed the fields. So, the fields are plowed, the bodies are scattered. We know they're out there. Do we know exactly where they're buried? I hear occasionally somebody saying, there's a trench over there. Like the one that comes to mind often is the 2nd Maryland Confederate Monument on Culp's Hill. There's a hole in the ground behind the monument. People say it's a burial trench.
Uh-oh. Are you going to wait?
That is not.
A lot of people, wait, Tim. A lot of people are going to get upset now. Mythbuster.
Yeah, you're
number one. Here we go.
Right now.
Here we go. Go ahead, Tim.
It is based on absolutely no factual information whatsoever.
Where does it come from? Just because there's a depression there?
I know that, there's a depression there, and I know that people started saying that it was the burial site, and I think maybe someone took the 1867 Tyson Brothers photograph that shows burial trenches and identified it at that location, then it's just sort of getting out of hand. But there's no evidence that there was a burial.
Is it on the Elliott map there?
I don't think so, no.
Okay. So
again, that's another thing. Is there a burial trench in at that spot on the Elliott burial map? But again, the Elliott burial map is so general, you could say, well, there was one. The other thing is, it's on park property. And the park, to answer one of Veronica's questions here, the park the park has always put forth the idea that the battlefield is sacred ground,
right.
that we know that men died here. We know that men are probably still buried out there. And the idea has never been to touch them. So they don't go out of their way to do an archaeological dig of any of the sites on the battlefield that are suspected of being burial trenches. They're not going to dig up a grave. Now,
so in other words, if there's a question about something, they're not going to be like, well, let's go dig it up and see what there is. Like they're going to just leave it be because there's no importance.
Now, there was an archaeological dig of a burial site at the railroad cut in 1996, was it? Yeah. But that was based on the fact that someone had found the skeleton that was eroding out of the soil. And
that's a little different.
That's a little bit different. They found it. But then here's the other thing that's interesting from a historical perspective at the Adams County Historical Society. We have a file called Bodies Found. And a friend of mine, a longtime employee of the Historical Society, Randy Miller, he's really put forth an effort to, every time he finds an article where there's a body found on the battlefield, put it in the file. And I don't know, we might have like 30, 40 articles over the years in the local newspaper where somebody finds a body or bodies on the battlefield. And some of them are quite extensive.
But are these soldier bodies or are these, so it's not, it's not counting suicides and...
No. Usually these are buttons found with them or uniform items or belt buckles. But what's really interesting about it, like there's a great article, and I think it's in the 1880s, where they find like 12 skeletons on the John farm, basically where General Pickett's all-you-can-eat battlefield buffet is.
Right.
And they dig them up. And then they just rebury them at the same spot. It's not like they dig them up and move the body somewhere when they find them. They dig them up and then they rebury them at the same location.
So they see what information they can glean from the bodies and then just put them back?
In that case, they were in the middle of the field and the farmer's trying to plow it, so they reburied them at the edge of the field.
Oh, gotcha. Gotcha.
And so they usually rebury the bodies right at the same spot. They don't rebury the bodies in the National Cemetery because, of course, they're Southerners and, theoretically. And there's the National Cemetery for the Northerners.
Right.
But so we have accounts where guys were dug up and reburied on the battlefield itself. And there's all kinds of articles. So we do have lots of information. Now, I should tell you, there are bodies found on private sites that are not part of the National Park Service, like the one I just mentioned, for instance. But when in the 1980s, I'm going to say it's the late 1980s, for a time I worked at a relic shop in Gettysburg. And a guy came into the shop, had 2 bodies that he had found and sold them. And I guess at that time, it was not illegal to sell
Right, you can't do that today.
No, you can't. Since the past strict regulations about that. But this guy was metal detecting at a farm site not far south of Gettysburg in the hospital areas and found a skeleton. And, he sold the skeleton. And I was horrified by the whole thing.
Sure, yeah, it is kind of horrifying. Was it in a uniform and everything? I mean, like there was
buttons and stuff.
Buttons,
yes,
yeah. Okay.
And they had some good documentation about where they got it from.
Okay.
I know that one guy in town who metal detects when I was a kid, and this would probably be this was in the 70s, somewhere in Antietam, he found a foot of a soldier still in the boot.
Oh, nice.
So, I mean, the point is, there have been, skeletons found on the battlefield. Now, do we know, can we point to a site and say there's a guy buried there? I don't recall a single instance that on the battlefield. Now, somebody might know that. They might have done some testing on that, but they're not sharing that with us. So I don't think there's a positively identified site. Now, of course, tourists think that all the little flank markers on the battlefield, that they're grave markers on top of people's graves.
Right.
But they might be getting that from like Little Bighorn.
Oh, yeah, because they look exactly like them. Yeah. Some of them, yeah. No, I mean, it is kind of weird that they only put the graves so far apart from the monument, just on the end.
Yeah.
But yeah. Did I ever tell you the cadaver dog story?
Cadaver dog? No, but I have my own ideas about cadaver dog.
Yeah. Well, it was on private property, and it was in concert with the Elliott map. And we had gone out with the Elliott map to this property, and we knew the owner, and he gave us permission to go. And there's a little creek that meanders through the property, And there's a trench right off of that creek. And we're like, if we could find this little bend in the creek, there would be a trench somewhere there. So we went, we found what we thought was the area, and then somebody stumbled on a depression in the ground that was too neat to be natural, if that makes sense. But not perfect, but still. So, I don't know, a day or two later, we know these people with cadaver dogs that were in town, and we brought them over there, and both of the dogs, they brought them in separately, hit on the same spot. Now, the second dog might have been just following the scent of the first dog. I don't know. But it was interesting, and it matches up with the Elliott map.
Yeah, I mean, my basic problem with cadaver dogs, I have like 5 problems with cadaver dogs.
Okay.
But one, I would ask, what are they looking for? What do you suspect the cadaver dogs are smelling or using to determine where a body was once buried?
Well, these were dogs that were trained to detect dead human flesh.
Now that means decayed human flesh.
Like they were actually at 9/11 in the pile trying to find people.
Yeah, but they're recent. We're talking about 150 years ago.
I understand. Well, and that's the thing so that was my question to the guy. How can they smell something? I mean, rain has come through there. It's, the creek has flooded, the water is washed through, and apparently it's like the grease stain or something that the body leaves behind.
I saw somebody doing it in the fields of Pickett's Charge, and where they claimed to have found, evidence.
I shot the video for that, I think, if it's the same thing.
How about if there's 100 people died at near location, they're bleeding all over the place, they're buried at a certain location, and then the fields are plowed and their remains are scattered over a large area.
Yeah.
How in the world does all that work?
I don't understand it.
My next problem with the cadaver dogs is that some of these people, and even the ones I saw had a sign on their van, they're not just cadaver dogs, they are psychic cadaver dogs.
Well,
it's always got to be.
These were psychic cadaver dogs.
It's always got to be some extra bit of, they have special senses.
Psychic.
Yeah.
No, I've never heard of a psychic cadaver dog, but I believe you. I just have never heard of it.
So that it gets to the extreme. It's just like, to me, I always want to know the science behind something.
Yeah.
Dowsing.
Yeah.
You take a piece of wood and you find water. Bullshit.
Right.
Bullshit. You can read articles about this. It is not legitimate in any way, shape, or form. But I have talked to reasonable people who defend that practice.
Who was telling me about? What were we talking about the other day, Veronica? Can you go ahead, grab the mic and speak into it there, because don't give names. Just tell the story in a very vague sense.
So a couple acquaintances.
Right up to the mic, dear.
Sorry, a couple acquaintances were telling us about how Dean Schultz was kind enough to give a.
You just gave a name.
No, Dean Schultz was kind enough to give a tour, and on the tour he did some kind of example with the divining rods or something.
Yes.
And these folks were claiming that they could tell where the soldier's body was laid, and if they had perhaps a leg amputated, because the divining rod would actually kind of turn in on itself if there was the lower leg was missing, for example. Yeah. So that's what
I would simply say, when I talk to people, I'm like, okay, explain the science behind this.
Right.
So
it's magic, Tim.
And I've heard different things about water. So the water, when people say detect water with a dowsing rod, they claim that our body is made up of a large amount of water. So our body acts like a metal detector to find water. But
aren't we made up of 90?
Are we determining the hollow spot in the ground?
That's what I asked. Yeah.
Right.
So again, I just want to know the science, and then I'll check the science, and guess what I'm going to find? Bullshit. So I mean, I'm pretty.
It's brutal tonight.
I know.
We gotta have our facts in line. I mean,
Yeah, no, I never understood those either, and how can I trust that you're not using your pinky to slightly move it, or I mean, you know what I mean? Nobody's still.
No, I'm not saying there's not the body. I mean, maybe there's bodies buried, at these places. Who knows? But water's everywhere. So
including us.
You dig 50 feet, you're going to find water, maybe. You dig 100 feet, you're going to find water. You know, you're going to find it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think, you know, it's just the cadaver dog, the whole cadaver dog thing just bothers me. It's not like we're looking for decomposing bodies that have a scent. So
right, because they're gone, long gone. Yeah. And then really, if you think about it, all the humans that have traipsed all over the earth for all these tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of years, if you can detect a dead guy under the ground 160 years old, then why not 160,000 years old if you got a strong enough nose? You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be decayed human flesh in every morsel of dirt. Like you're saying with the plows, the plowed fields. Like, it's got to be remains everywhere. Yeah. This is more suited for a Halloween show.
Let me hit you with that. Let me hit you with that since you just mentioned it. Okay, so, you know, what's Meadowcroft is like 18,000 years ago. I think in Adams County, we say that maybe we've had inhabitants for 12,000 years.
Okay. And
Europeans have been here for 300 years. 2% of the time of human habitation. What about the other 98% of human habitation with all these people dying? They're probably buried everywhere.
They're all over the place, yeah. No, that's a great point, too. We only think it begins with us, but it doesn't. It goes way back. Another myth. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's move on.
All right, let's move on then. So we covered our myths and everything. So what we're going to do, the live audience, this doesn't make a difference for you. It's only going to be like 5 seconds. But for the podcast audience, we're going to take a break. We'll come right back with all of your questions, and then we will get some answers. Let's have some fun today with this, okay? We're going to have some laughs. We're going to bust some myths, and we're going to bust a move. That's the most important thing. We'll be right back.
That's another great question.
Okay, and we're back with questions for Tim Smith. Today we are myth busting the myths surrounding the Battle of Gettysburg and Gettysburg as a whole. These questions are submitted by some of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. And if you'd like to submit some questions for our guides to answer and get exclusive content that takes a closer look at all things Gettysburg and Gettysburg related, please consider joining us on Patreon today. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Okay, Tim, are you ready for these questions?
Yeah, but before we hit them, let me just mention that, you know, myths are kind of circular. In other words, sometimes we're not always busting myths. Sometimes there's a myth that has been created, and then we're trying to show that that myth is true. I would argue that my book on the story of Lee's headquarters, that I was told that Lee didn't use the Thompson House, and it was just a myth, and he had his headquarters in a tent across the street.
Right.
And then you know, the owner of Lee's headquarters, Andy Larson, at the time, came to me and said, "Hey, I want you to look into some stuff that I have here." And I looked at stuff and I was like, wow, there's some pretty good evidence that Lee actually did use the house. And yet, you know, people were saying that he didn't. So sometimes we're not just busting myths. Sometimes there's a story that's been around and people associate it as a myth, and then you realize that it actually you know,
so it's like reverse mythism.
Yeah, everything's based on something.
Yes.
And so sometimes, you know, there's always a thread of truth in every story.
Are there some that maybe a guide might have started as a joke?
Absolutely.
And then it just turned into a myth?
Yeah.
Well, actually, you did, didn't you? with the Indian battle down at Devil's Den.
Yeah,
You
not
mean the
on
first
purpose.
Battle of Gettysburg?
Not on purpose.
Right.
I think I was trying to be dramatic when I in the Devil's Den book, when I came across these articles about people finding artifacts around Devil's Den and then speculating that there had been an ancient battle there. And Emanuel Bushman had this really dramatic quote about how, isn't it ironic that the greatest battle of Native American history and the greatest battle of modern history were fought at the same spot? So I wanted to make that, that dramatic statement in the end of my little section. And I guess I left out the fact that, hey, people, this is not real. There's no Native American battle at this site. It's just they're finding artifacts and they don't know how to explain them.
Right.
So... But sometimes I think, and I love to tell the story. He's been on our podcast before, and I'm sure I'd love to have him tell it at some point. But the Reverend Roy Frampton, who's the latest battlefield guide, he did a Halloween tour of the battlefield through the national park. I think it was for the Friends of the National Park. They just asked him if he would be interested in doing it. And he made up some stories, and he gave a walking tour from Devil's Den across the wheat field and told these really cool stories. And he's a great storyteller.
Yeah.
And then at the end, he said, I want everybody to know that, I created these stories for our tour. And people loved the stories. They were great. But since he did that tour, 3 or 4 of his stories have ended up in ghost books and have become part of the ghost lore and legend. And it's funny to hear him, espouse these stories and how bad he feels about the fact that he made up a story and now people are telling it.
Believe it. Yeah. Well, that's a whole other can of worms.
You have to ask Roy about it.
All right, let's get to some questions here from our listeners here. John Calcagni. He says, so glad to see you and Tim doing it up again. He missed you, Tim. So let's see what his question is now. I would love to know Tim's opinion of the so-called confrontation of who's in charge when Howard and Hancock met at Cemetery Hill on July 1st.
Wow. Interesting. I know that, Abner Doubleday plays a role in this also. And on the evening of July 1st, what he's referring to, on the evening of July 1st, General Hancock is sent by General Meade to the field of battle to take, basically he's sent here to get an idea of the situation in Gettysburg ahead of General Meade sending the entire army to the spot. And General Meade was given special authority by the War Department to place any general in any position of command that he so desired and to relieve other generals of command. And he did some of this when he first took command, like asking Alfred Pleasonton if there was somebody he'd like to promote. 3 captains were promoted to generals.
Right.
And he could mess around with the seniority. Now, Howard outranked General Hancock on the field, but General Hancock was sent by Meade to take command of the troops on the field. So on the evening of July 1st, as the troops are retreating back through Gettysburg on the Cemetery Hill, there's this minor altercation between Howard and Hancock as to who was actually in command of the field.
So when you said that he outranked him, for those who might be listening to that at home, get a little confused thinking, well, they're both major generals.
Their seniority. And
it's based seniority. Explain that.
It's based upon the date that you received your commission for that rank.
Right.
And then if you received it at the same time, then it would go back to, who was a brigadier general first? And,
Okay.
So, Howard outranked General Hancock, but Hancock was sent here. Now, I think in this case, when you read about it, to me, it's much to do about nothing. Hancock's only here for a short time. He rallies the troops on Cemetery Hill. He has this little discussion about who's in command with Howard, and then Howard rides away and says, okay, you take care of the troops over here, and I'll go over there, and I'll take care of them over there.
Right.
But then people have written books about it, and they really make a mountain out of a molehill. I don't see that in effect this actually it lingers or has any adverse effects to the troops on Cemetery Hill on the evening of July 1st. And Howard and Hancock, both do a great job of rallying the troops.
I always thought the story was that Hancock came up here and said, I have orders from General Meade just to take command. Do you want to see them? And Howard's like, nah, it's okay. It's a
little more detailed than that.
Okay, essentially
a little more confrontation. But then what ends up happening is Abner Doubleday's upset because Howard reported him in a bad light to the high command, which Doubleday believes ends up in his replacement or release from his position later after the battle. And so he's a little more critical of Howard in his writings and when he describes this moment.
Okay.
And then Howard is defensive of this moment. And then Hancock, Hancock, he's a little curmudgeon-y later, and he writes a little bit about it. So, but the interesting thing about it is that I think this thing resurfaced recently when we had that book by Alan Gelzo, which is not my favorite book in the world.
No, I know.
And one of the just way off the wall comments in that book was about this situation, and he says that in his book, and I'm paraphrasing. Anybody can find this in the book and look it up. He says something like, "It would be missed by no one that the senior Republican on the field was superseded by a Democrat."
Yeah.
Like that this was like thought of in advance to get a Republican off of the. So
Pennsylvania's being invaded, and Meade's got the time to think of political considerations.
It's just preposterous.
Well,
so I guess it gets to that, but I don't. And just again, I think different people think about things in different ways.
Sure.
I'm not a big fan of General Howard on the first day of the battle in general. His overall performance, but I'm not. I don't know how critical I am at this moment. He probably just feels like a slap in the face that Hancock is being, put above him at that moment.
Right, because Hancock, he was only promoted from division command with the last battle, right?
Yeah, Darius Couch was in command of the 2nd Army Corps, and he had resigned in a huff because of General Hooker. And, of course, Darius Couch becomes head of the Department of the Susquehanna during the Gettysburg Campaign, and Hancock's the commander of the 2nd Army Corps then.
All right, Mike Lentz, he's got 3 of them. He says, I was watching the Ken Burns documentary recently, and at the conclusion of describing the action on the first day, the writer of the documentary states that compared to what was to come, the day's fighting had been a skirmish. Why is the first day so consistently misrepresented as being smaller or less than the other 2 days? Great question, Mike. I always am frustrated by this too. Why?
Well, I think there's a few reasons, but in the case of that documentary, they did that because they had a lot to say about the second day.
Yeah, they wanted to get over to that.
Simply, Joshua Chamberlain wasn't there on July 1st, and they wanted to hurry up and get to him.
Right.
So they had to have the first day as a skirmish. I think what frustrates me in a lot of times, and not to criticize the Killer Angels per se, but for instance, the novel The Killer Angels, which Ken Burns obviously used when he did his documentary. They talk about the cavalry action. The cavalry is the first day, and then the Union Army falls back to Cemetery Hill, and then there's the second and third day. So I think, the infantry action on July 1st is missed. I have always thought that one of the reasons the first day gets shortchanged is because the South won the first day. And the less said about that, the better. Let's get to the spot where the North, who's telling the story afterwards, is winning.
Right, okay.
And so the least said about the Union defeat on July 1st, the better. So I think a lot of times the first day is characterized as a holding action where we're holding the Confederates back, and then we all fall back to a prearranged defensive position on Cemetery Hill. So to talk about the details of the first day's fighting, get in the way of that narrative. Now, I love the first day. I love talking about the first day. So it does bother me a lot that, and if you think of it in amount of casualties, the second day is the bloodiest day of the battle. But then the first day,
Pretty close.
Is second. And the third day is kind of the least bloodiest action of the battle, and it gets the most attention with Pickett's charge.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much one-sided, and that's probably why the casualties are a lot lower. Now,
I once heard a ghost tour tell people that the reason Pickett's charge is so famous is because you know about all those casualties in the Battle of Gettysburg. Well, most of them were sustained in Pickett's charge.
Yeah, and I think people are surprised when we have them on tour to hear that Pickett's charge is not the bloodiest action of the battle, and then it's
because they probably went on a ghost tour first, Tim. Yeah. But anyway, but what was your? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'd say that's some of the reasons that it's minimized, and then and then also you got to think of, because the North did not win the first day of the battle. When they're putting up monuments and purchasing property, the GBMA and then later the War Department, they don't buy the areas around the field where the Southern Army made their assault from, like on the second and third day. So the first day's battlefield itself, you got the town in the middle of the battlefield, the Gettysburg College campus is in the middle of the battlefield. When the golf course was there, they came across the golf course. Mm-hmm. We don't preserve at all the Confederate line of battle where they advanced from on July 1st.
Or any of the stretch that the 8th Illinois was fighting along on Chambersburg.
Yeah, so a lot of the area where we're talking about is not preserved.
Yeah.
And it's, so in size when you go out there. And, and then simply that, especially when you're on a tour, let's get through the first day of the battle just so we can get to the meat of the fighting. So I just think it gets shortchanged because they're trying to get ahead to, and I'm sure, we should probably try to get Ken Burns on here one time and talk to him about it.
Well, look, in the 6 degrees of Kenny Burns, you're my link.
Okay. I'm part of that 6 degrees.
Yeah, you are.
So, but I would suspect.
Tell him I had Tom Berenger on, and maybe that'll be like, oh, well, if Tom will do it,
I would suspect that in the bigger scheme of things, he looked at the time frame that he had to do the Battle of Gettysburg and divided it up and said, okay, the first day gets 5 minutes, the second day gets 20 minutes, the third day gets 15 minutes. And so that's probably how it works.
That I could see. But the thing that Mike points out is that he does say, compared to the next, it's been a skirmish, but it wasn't. It was second to the second day. Well,
I mean, I think that sometimes they make these statements for drama.
Yeah.
I mean, and I probably said this on the show before, but one of my cringy moments in the Ken Burns series, which I think a lot of people really like, is when Shelby Foote says that the Battle of Shiloh was bloodier than the Battle of Waterloo. Yet in the Civil War, there would be 20 more Waterloos yet to come.
Yes.
And of course, Shiloh is not, there's not 20 battles that are bloodier than Shiloh in the Civil War. And Waterloo has like 70,000 casualties, more than the Battle of Gettysburg.
Right.
What are you talking about? There's no Civil War battle that even compares to Waterloo.
I'm sure he felt fine with that because most people probably didn't know anything about the Battle of Waterloo.
It's such a dramatic quote that it didn't matter that it wasn't true.
Well, you could tell that he because he relies so heavily on Shelby Foote, that he is more about telling a good story than history.
And it's a great story.
It is.
So,
it's well told.
Yeah.
It's my I mean, I love it, but there's still problems in there that I read or hear, and I'm just like,
So, I mean, I can understand like his comment about, I can understand that you're frustrated by the two things, how the first day shortchanged and then how they characterize the first day of the fighting. Yeah, I understand.
All right, his next one is one of the constant stories that pop up about Buford in the action on the first day is that his men had Spencer repeating rifles. Did they? And if not, what type of rifles were his commands equipped with? In case you don't know this off the top of your head, Eric did a little bit of homework.
Excellent.
Yes. So you want to go ahead?
You just want me to do it?
Do you want to try it, or do you want to? Do you have it at the top of your head?
Well, I know they have single shots Sharps rifles, and I know that the part of the 6th Michigan has some Spencer repeating rifles, correct?
Yeah.
But nobody in Buford's command has repeating rifles.
No. So the breakdown is Devon's brigade, the 6th New York, and the 9th New York have Sharps. The 17th PA has Merrill carbines, and the 3rd West Virginia Burnsides. And then Gamble's brigade, the 8th Illinois has Sharps, 12th Illinois has Burnsides, 3rd Indiana has Burnsides, and the 8th New York have Sharps. And then Merritt's entire brigade are all equipped with Sharps carbines.
Lovely. Lovely.
There you go.
Oh my,
Lovely.
Good job.
yay!
So, let me. I like what I like about this story, and this is, if I was to run down the biggest myths questions that we get, this would be one of them, and it's in everything about the battle. This idea that Buford's men have repeating carbines.
Yeah,
it's in a lot of books on the battle.
I remember you used to take the double-decker bus tour with when they had the audio that you would listen to, and it claimed that they had repeating rifles.
So there's a book that's written in the 1920s about the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. And it's called The Story of the Battle of Gettysburg by James Knock Polk Scott.
Wow.
And I think he was in the 1st Pennsylvania Cavalry, and he was from Chambersburg. And but he was a tour guide. He lived here in Gettysburg after the war. He's buried in our National Cemetery. And in his book, he tells a story that, they have repeating rifles and they hold the Confederates back. And it's a dramatic part of the story because, as we all know, a small amount of Buford's men held back 7,000 Confederate soldiers for 3 hours.
Yes.
So they do it by these, repeating rifles. And in the book, he says that they capture a Confederate prisoner on July 1st, and the Confederate prisoner comes up and says, "What do you do? Load those things on Sunday and fire them all week?" And so this comes from this book. And so I have to blame Gettysburg tour guides for this.
Wow. Blaming your own.
That's interesting.
That is interesting. Because wasn't that, well, I guess a lot of people have said that about the Henry or the Spencer, because I thought that was attributed to someone responding to the Henry.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
There's a couple of places.
Do you remember the movie, the miniseries, The Blue and the Gray?
Yeah.
Is it there a scene there where somebody brings him a Spencer repeating rifle just before the Battle of Gettysburg, and he's on the White House lawn practicing?
Yes.
Firing.
Lincoln. You're talking about Lincoln, right? Yeah. That's the one with Stacy Keach, right?
Stacy Keach.
That actually did happen.
Stacy Keach?
No, not Stacy Keach.
I was
She
gonna
didn't
say.
have anything to do with it. Christopher Spencer actually brought the Spencer rifle, not carbine, to the White House because it seems Abraham Lincoln had this thing for guns. I guess he was a gun nut.
Sure.
And was allowed to shoot the Spencer. Now, Tim's, of course, looking at me like I've gone completely off of the rails. Maybe I'm not right about this, but that's what I knew to be real.
What, that he brought a rifle and not a carbine?
No, that Abraham Lincoln he had test fired the Spencer carbine and then ordered the War Department to purchase a few thousand of them.
Oh, I think it's because my knowledge of this, believe me, I'm not going to criticize. My knowledge comes from the movie.
Oh no! I've never actually seen The Blue and the Gray.
Oh, it's a doozy. Who's the blonde woman, the Stacy Keach's love interest? She's been in things.
She was the one who was on Newhart.
That's right. Damn, what was her name? Google that, please.
I don't know.
Bob Newhart, blonde girl.
Yeah, she was the maid on Newhart.
Yeah, the maid.
Very
She played the maid, housekeeper.
Somebody's texting me. What's the question? I'll bet.
Oh,
so from Facebook.
They're like, get off of there right now.
But watch, they probably put the answer on here. But one thing, let's look at this a different way.
Okay.
They do have single shot Buford's men carbines.
Oh yeah.
And their rate of fire is a good deal greater than the rifled musket smoothbore musket even that they're using in the Confederates. The other thing that I think about it, though, when I've read about it, it seems to me that the Sharps has a lesser range than the Confederate rifled weapons that are being used against them. So they have to stay back. They can't really get too close. If they get within a certain range, the Union fire isn't going to be able to reach the Confederates, and Confederates will be able to reach them.
Right.
And then the other thing about, to me, again, I'm going to tell you this, the fighting prowess of the Union cavalry is greatly exaggerated on July 1st.
Here we go.
How many people did the 8th Illinois have killed in the battle? 1.
That just means that you killed more. You killed better. Veronica, what do you have there?
Julia Duffy.
Julia Duffy, that was her name.
That's
Yeah,
her name.
there you go.
That's
Okay, now go back to your cavalry bashing. Go ahead.
So here's something great. I want everybody to watch this. I think I was on. I think it's on Netflix. There's this movie you can watch. It's called The Sword of Truth. Have you seen this?
Never heard of it.
It's brand new. It's basically where this couple. This lady, her grandfather dies and leaves her a Civil War sword, and the whole movie is about her trying to sell the Civil War sword.
Okay,
and it's a fascinating little tale. But near the end, they are held up by a guy with a gun, and one of the girls who's a star reaches over and grabs the cavalry saber and tries to slash and cut the guy with it. And it hits him on the shoulder and bounces off, and he says, "Ow."
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It's just a big
I see what you're
butter
saying.
knife.
Oh my God.
Okay, it's called The Sword of Truth.
Okay.
The Sword of Truth. Watch it so that joke makes sense.
So, are you done now?
No, I'm not.
Oh my God, you're.
I got another one.
Hello, exactly.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, going back to what Tim was saying before about the difference in effective range.
Yes.
There's an actual difference. A black powder. The accuracy and range of a black powder firearm is largely dependent on the length of the barrel. So if you've got an infantry rifled musket that's got like a 3.5 foot long barrel, you're going to have a significant difference in effective range between that and a carbine that's got like an 18-inch barrel. Right. But that's at really long range. That's like at extremely long ranges, like 1,200 yards. It makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about a practical range, like 200 to 300 yards, there's really not that much difference. There's a difference, but it's not so.
So, like with a carbine, you have to make a slight adjustment, whereas with a rifle, you wouldn't, or with a full musket, you wouldn't.
Well,
have
I mean, are you talking about like sight settings?
I'm saying if you guys are 300 yards apart.
Yeah.
And one side's got carbines, the other side's got a musket, rifled musket.
Sure.
The carbine guy is going to have to make some slight sight adjustments in order to...
They're both going to have to. It's just the sight adjustment is more extreme on a carbine than it is on a rifled musket.
Okay, got it.
They both have to make an adjustment.
Beautiful. Okay. Mike's final question is another multi-part question. And it concerns the 140th New York Regiment on Little Round Top. Why do people rub Patio O'Rourke's nose? What do they hope to accomplish by doing that? Where did it start? And can we please stop it?
Does he want us to stop it because it's probably not good for the statue?
Well, maybe.
Rubbing it, kind of like how people...
But it is the shiniest part of the...
People rub the toe of like in Michelangelo's David or something like that, and the toes like... Because they do.
Do they really?
Really?
Is that
Can they get that close to that?
Yeah, I'm exaggerating this.
No, there's some kind of historic statue. I think like they even kissed.
I mean, is that what we're doing?
Oh, you mean
had no
like
idea.
Venus de Milo? That's why she's missing her arms, because they've rubbed her arms off.
I mean, is that what we're fearing, that we stop it because it's going to hurt it?
I'm not fearing anything. I think it's the cleanest part of the. It's the shiniest part of the.
So I've been hanging out at Gettysburg since the 70s. You know, on a regular basis.
Right.
And I remember I was told by other tour guides that on the day you take your tour guide test, you go to Little Round Top and rub his nose.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't know anything about just being luck for other reasons, but that's what tour guides had told me. So on the day I took the tour guide test in December, on my way to the auditorium in the junior high school to take the test, I stopped on Little Round Top and I rubbed his nose.
Okay.
I remember that specifically.
So probably guides have mentioned that on the tour. You know, when we take our test, we rub this for good luck, and then people go, "Well, I'm going to rub it for good luck," and then they start
now I didn't
rubbing
know until later that people were saying that everybody rubs it for good luck. You know, I just had heard that part of the story. But so you know, people have always said that you rub his nose for good luck, and you know. I mean, the premise of it, obviously, is that Colonel Patrick O'Rourke graduated first in his class from West Point, and he was Irish.
Of course.
And I think...
Luck of the Irish.
You know, there were not a lot of Irishmen graduating at West Point, Irish-born.
Right.
So, and that's the premise of the story. And that's how, and some of these things I'm sure were just invented by one tour guide, and then the other tour guides just kept telling the stories. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting to have another tour guide on who's done more research in old tour guide
mythology.
Yeah. Fred Hawthorne would be a really good guy for that.
Okay.
And Fred's done a lot with the early history of the tour guides. But this is probably just a tour guide story that just has been told over and over again, and we just, we probably don't know the origin.
And it's snowballed. Okay, Maria Black. She asks, I hope this email finds you well. First, I just wanted to say that the material you've been releasing the last few weeks and months has been amazing. Thank you, Maria. I am writing you, she says, today in regards to a few questions that I have. I promise that my questions have nothing to do with my weird obsession with Jenny Wade. I've heard.
I don't know anyone that has a weird obsession with Jenny Wade.
I've heard you talk on the podcast before about helping people solve myths that have been taught since they were young, especially in the episode of the Civil War houses. It makes me think about the one that I've been told my entire life. Here it is. I live in Shippensburg, which is about 45 minutes from here, for those of you who don't know. Specifically in a little village called Lee's Crossroads, or Leesburg. The story goes that Robert E. Lee crossed through here on his way to Gettysburg, hence the name. It was a story that I have always loved to hear. However, after listening to that episode, it made me wonder if there was actually any proof. Is this something that could have happened and or did happen? I would really like to know, even though I don't know that my family would accept it if you said no. I figured you would be my best bet to figure this out and or point me in the right direction to figure it out. Help me, Obi-Wan. So
well, I'm not familiar with the story, but here's what I would do if I had read that. Two things I would do. Number one is I'd look in the History of Cumberland County, which is a book that was published in 1886, and it is an extensive book. You can find it on archives.org, or you could look at it on a Google book search, advanced book search, and you could bring it up, and then you could put the town, what did she was called?
Lee's Crossroad or Leesburg.
Yeah, I would look at those terms and see when they say that, see what they say about it.
I'm sorry, Lee's Crossing.
Lee's Crossing. Yeah, and then the other thing you can easily do is you can get on newspapers.com.
Lee's Crossroads, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Newspapers.com is a paid website you have to have a membership for. Or you can just go to a public library. But newspapers.com, you can search just Harrisburg newspapers or Chambersburg newspapers, or, I search just Gettysburg newspapers, and you put a term in it, and I would see the earliest that term comes up. So if it comes up prior to the battle, then obviously they weren't using it, and then it wasn't a result of the battle.
Right, that makes sense.
I think the one thing about these terms like that is, and I don't know one way or another whether, if it got its name because Lee passed through there, but we have towns and we have such stories here like that.
Right.
And one comes to mind is that the story got told that the Union Army comes through Tawnytown, Maryland on their way here, and I think they met at Gettysburg by Edward Stackpole, because I read that when I was a kid, and I lived not far from Tawnytown. He said that Tawnytown was named after Roger Brooke Tawney,
the Chief Justice?
Chief Justice of the Supreme Court that in 1857 is, the deciding judge in the Dred Scott case. And the town's formed in like 1790. And,
right.
He's not even, I don't know.
He's not even born.
He's a little kid.
Or is he a kid?
He might be a little kid.
Okay.
1790. So definitely not true, but it's right there in print in a book. And my favorite story dealing with a town is Barlow. So the town of Barlow is down the Tawnytown Road from what we said, just a few miles.
Yes.
And, at one point, I lived not too far from Barlow, and I voted at Barlow. That was my polling place, Barlow Fire Hall. And so being a resident of near Barlow, I was really interested in the story. And I think it's somewhere around 1896, they decided to place a post office there, and they asked they always ask when they create a new post office if anybody has any ideas for the name. And they thought, well, on July 1st, because the Emmitsburg Road is very crowded from Emmitsburg to Gettysburg, part of the 11th Corps shifted over from the Emmitsburg Road by way of Horner's Mill into the Tawnytown Road and then up to Gettysburg, and they passed through that area. So what are they going to name their town? Schimmelfinning? Schurz?
Right.
So they picked Barlow, and they named it after the general. Now, what's really fascinating about it is Barlow's division followed the First Corps up the Emmitsburg Road, and only Schurz and von Steinwehr's
they went up the Tawnytown Road.
Came over to the Tawnytown Road.
Yes.
So they ended up naming the town after a general who never passed through the area, and he never came back here after the war. He was never ever in Barlow, the town named.
So it just goes to show the anti-German sentiment.
Yeah, but it is in fact, that town is in fact named after Barlow.
Okay.
So just very similar to this.
Yeah. So right, and okay, that is interesting. I always wondered that. I never asked if it was named after him or if that predates the battle. So.
Definitely named after him.
Interesting. Okay, JP Horsemanship, the horsiest man around, wants to know, why does it seem that everyone believes Lee did not have cavalry with him during the Gettysburg Campaign, when realistically he had 4 brigades of cavalry, not including Stuart's 3 brigades?
Very good.
It is a very good question.
I think. On battlefield tours, tour guides use that a lot. And so we're very conscious of the fact that nobody seems to realize that. The Confederate Army has 7 brigades of cavalry with, attached to them during the Gettysburg Campaign. Now, whether they're actually part of the main army or, offshoots of them, like some people don't count Albert Jenkins because they're mounted infantry, not cavalry.
Okay. What are they mounted on? Rocks? Come on.
So, but the point, I think the reason that it's prevalent is this whole idea that Jeb Stuart's not here and Lee is blind. And so I think the story is promoted by people who are bashing Jeb Stuart for not providing valuable assistance to Lee. And I would just, one thing I would, not to get too far off on the tangent, but I would just point out that maybe Lee doesn't miss cavalry. Maybe he misses Jeb Stuart, the individual, more than he misses the cavalry. But yes,
it's the work that Stuart does that he misses. He misses men on horses.
Yeah, not the actual men on horseback who can scout, but the ability of Jeb Stuart to order the men to scout and then relay that information back to him. So maybe he's waiting for this information to go from the cavalrymen out to Stuart and then back to him.
Okay.
But I think no one would argue that Lee uses to his benefit the cavalry that are left behind with him. And I think that's part of the problem. We realize that he, when people say he doesn't have cavalry, he does. But he doesn't use them effectively or to his advantage. And so, he kind of misses Stuart. But I think it's promoted that Lee doesn't have them primarily A, to criticize Jeb Stuart, and B, to provide Lee with one of the excuses why he ends up losing the battle, because he doesn't, bumbles into the Union Army because Jeb Stuart's not here. So it provides him with an excuse.
Gotcha.
But when people bring that up on tours, tour guides, I think every one of them is very quick to point out, well, he does have cavalry with him. He just doesn't use them.
Okay.
But he doesn't use them in front of Heath, for instance.
Right.
Hey, the person who criticizes the Confederate High Command the most for not using them is Heath. Heath, after the war, people are bashing Heath because he brought on the battle.
Right.
Remember, without orders. He's not supposed to bring on a general engagement until the rest of the army is concentrated, or the army's concentrated, and he brings on the battle. And he says, hey, where was the cavalry that was supposed to be in front of me? So
yeah, because he starts off the march with artillery at the head of his column, right?
Yeah, he's riding it up. We think a section.
A section.
A section of Mary's battery. I think.
All right. But still, I mean, he doesn't even have infantry. Well, but most of the time they're behind their own skirmish line anyway, right? It's when they get to the creek, it's when he changes.
Yeah. When he brings up.
But still,
it's true.
it would have helped if he had.
But I think
cavalry.
that's a nice myth. There's probably lots of myths associated with Jeb Stuart and the cavalry.
Yeah. So do you think that whole Jeb Stuart thing is overblown? Because I like the way the distinction that you make there, where it's not that he didn't have it. It's that he didn't use it. Yeah.
Well, the other thing, here's my thing about the cavalry. When somebody wants to really get into it and start talking, you might notice that I should preface this, that I have a problem pronouncing the term.
Cavalry.
Yeah. Well, me from Bulmer.
Uh-huh.
I honestly, I got to tell you this. When I was a kid, I did not know there was a difference between the word cavalry and Calvary.
Okay. Where Jesus was killed and people who ride horses.
Right. Yeah. I thought they were the same word.
A lot of people do.
So I'm coming from that background and mispronouncing things in Baltimore anyway.
Okay.
So, but
all you had to say was Baltimore, and I understood everything else. So
that's true. So but now see.
Now you lost it. You're talking about cavalry and.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Here's my thing. What do you want Jeb Stuart to tell you anyway?
Go on.
What kind of information is Jeb Stuart what kind of information he's expected to give to Lee about the whereabouts of the Union Army anyway? I'll tell you what, we misinterpret the ability of Jeb Stuart to find intelligence of the Northern Army. In Virginia, what did he do? Okay, let's say Jeb Stuart's riding through Virginia, and he wants to provide Lee with information.
Yeah.
So he goes over to a house, and he knocks on the door and says, "Have you seen the Union Army?" And they say, "They're in the woods over there." And then he goes back to Lee, and he says, "Hey, they're in the woods over there."
Mm-hmm. There's Yankees in the bushes.
So he's riding across the countryside in Pennsylvania, and he's like, "Have you seen the Yankees?" And they're talking Pennsylvania Dutch.
Right.
First of all, the Northern Army's not even here. The Northern Army's marching
down south.
here.
Yeah.
So what kind of information is he going to provide?
And he knows that, right? Doesn't he know that?
Yeah. And then that's why the Northern cavalry ride ahead of the Southern the infantry to hold him back from gathering information.
Right.
And I don't know about the gathering during an active campaign. I don't know about the information gathering ability of these forces and what we're hoping he's going to tell Lee anyway. And let's say he does his job and he goes to Lee and says, "Hey, the whole Union Army is on Cemetery Hill." I think Lee knew that and he attacked it anyway.
Yes.
Is he gonna say something to Lee that's gonna make Lee not attack?
Right.
I don't know.
So it sounds to me like this is just one of another. It's another example of the lost cause religion getting into.
Yeah, I think sometimes
history.
I think sometimes in our haste to create reasons why Lee lost, that we create other problems in our narrative of the battle.
Everybody wants someone to blame, and they don't want to believe that losers lose. Sometimes. Okay. Where did I leave off? Brian Darenick here. He's got 2 questions. Tim, can you talk about the myth that both armies did not know the whereabouts of the other on July 1st and that they accidentally stumbled into one another? Let's start with that one.
Okay. Well, I think I pointed this out on one of the podcasts before, but the word accident actually comes from General Henry Heath in his book, where he's describing the battle and how it started. He uses that word that they met by accident. And to me, the word accident is a really poor choice of words. It was an accident, except both armies were looking for each other and both armies were trying to kill each other. You know what? That's it, opposite of an accident. It was not an accident.
And Pettigrew told him that they had seen Union troops.
It's just that maybe Hill and Heath don't believe Pettigrew.
But they don't want to believe him, and so it's an accident. But it could have been avoided.
Yeah.
If they had listened.
The accidental thing is the spot where they meet.
Yeah.
At the point of the first day of the battle, both armies are marching towards each other. Both armies are trying to concentrate. Both armies are trying to meet each other, but they don't know where that will happen.
Right.
Here's what I like that's really funny. And I thought of this when I was at Harrisburg one day. At Harrisburg, at the State Archives, they have this great record group, and it's all the telegrams that came into Governor Curtin's office.
Oh, yeah.
From, York and from Philadelphia and from Washington, D.C. and from Pittsburgh. And there's, I can just see the telegraph operator, because I went through the files for, June 30th, July 1st, and you could pile them on a desk. And what I really like is sometimes historians, I'll blame historians, they will reach into the middle of the pile and they will pull out a piece of telegram and say, the Confederates are in Chambersburg, they're marching from York to Carlisle, they're in Carlisle. See, this telegram told them exactly where the Confederate Army was. Yeah, but it's in a pile with 50 others that say the Confederates are attacking Philadelphia or the Confederates are attacking Chambersburg, and it's just hard to understand the massive amount of misinformation that both armies have in regards to where the other army actually is.
It's always like, how like they have, and it doesn't matter, this happens with any president, there's like a memo. Oh, probably the most famous one in the last 20 years has been Bin Laden determined to attack within the United States. Doesn't say when, doesn't say where, doesn't say how. Oh, maybe it says how. I think it did say how. But that's it. But that was one memo that was received on a day where there were dozens. Yeah. And that was during a week where there were dozens more. But when something eventful, or not eventful, what's the word I'm looking for? Momentous, significant happens, then all of a sudden everything matters.
Yeah, and so I think that, when we can sit back today, and I can look at Robert E. Lee's message to Jefferson Davis on July 4th. When he determined that Hooker had reached Frederick, he decided to order for the concentration of his army at Gettysburg, he says. Now, we know it's a little more complicated than that. And then Meade says to General Reynolds, a couple days before the battle, that wherever the army concentrate, that's the point I'm going to concentrate. And then they're moving northward, and we can see in all the dispatches, they keep mentioning the town of Gettysburg, and we can look at the town of Gettysburg, and we see where all the units are, and we're like, wow, they're going to meet at Gettysburg. Both armies, in effect, had ordered for the concentration of their army at Gettysburg without realizing the other one had also done so.
Right.
And that's why the battle is fought here.
And you look at a map, and you look and you see all the roads lead there. It makes sense.
Yeah. But they don't realize it until the morning of July 1st, when General Buford learns that, the troops are advancing on the town, and then the things start really rolling. Yeah. With him and Reynolds. And so it's also interesting that in the movie Gettysburg, of course, which is based on the Killer Angels, and I think this point is largely comes from that fictional novel, is that both sides knew, or they give the impression that Buford knows the Southerners are advancing on Gettysburg on July 1st, and he knows that on the evening of June 30th. They give that impression, and that's clearly not the case. He doesn't realize that until the next morning. He knows they're marching back and forth, and he knows they're camped near Gettysburg, but he doesn't know they're advancing on that town until the next morning when it occurs. And in the movie, there's almost this, in the novel, there's almost this idea that both sides know it, and they're marching to quickly get to that town as fast as they can. And it creates this, anticipation that there's going to be a battle there.
Right. Okay, so he had a second one, but we already answered it before somebody else had it. So we'll go over to Joey P. He says, I'd love to hear Tim's take on the Barlow-Gordon incident. I've heard other guides and historians cast doubt on the encounter and subsequent friendship many years later, but I don't think I've heard Mr. Smith's verdict. Well, you haven't listened to the Barlow's Knoll episode, because I believe we did get into this, but Tim, go ahead, refresh us.
I don't know how much I remember about the specifics. I remember I had read up on it right when we gave that Barlow's Knoll thing.
You were livid. I just remember you were livid about it. You were throwing things.
I know that. I think what happens sometimes is there's a back and forth in these legends and myths where a tour guide would mention, like, this is just a made-up story by Gordon, which largely it appears to be a made-up story by Gordon. But and then what happens is, somebody had said, oh, well, this didn't come about. This wasn't told early on. It wasn't told until Gordon wrote about it in his reminiscence of the Civil War. And then, someone who's researching finds an article that's written in the 1880s that mentions the story. And they're like, well, you see, it is mentioned earlier. And then it swings back and forth, back the other way to where there is a kernel of truth to the story. But in largely, it's a fictional, not a fictional, but a story that's embellished greatly by General Gordon.
Is there any truth to it?
Yeah, I think, Barlow's wounded during the battle.
Okay.
No. And at some point, Gordon does encounter Barlow, and they talk. But does Gordon then later think that Barlow had died? And does Barlow think that Gordon had died? And
do
there's
they
this
care?
Whole conversation with them at a dinner party later on when one's a senator and one's, with the governor of Georgia. And I think that part is probably just exaggerated. Then they became fast friends, and I don't think they talked to each other afterwards that event at all. I mean, some of these things are just really embellished. So I mean, there's always truth to the stories, or a kernel of truth usually, and then they just get out of control. So I think with that one, it depends on how far you want to take it. And if the question is, I think you can answer it in several different fashions, but does John B. Gordon exaggerate stories in his reminiscence of the Civil War? Yes.
Mm-hmm. So so he exaggerated some, and so why not all?
Yeah, he does exaggerate a little bit.
Okay. Okay. Let's see here. What he has another one. Without being able to cite specifics off the top of my head, I've read multiple accounts of soldiers of various ranks having a premonition of their death before the battle and then being killed shortly after. I'm wondering, was this something that was fairly common and perhaps blown out of proportion? A soldier fearing the worst and passing his prized possessions off to a trusted war buddy for keepsake? Great topic. I hope you're looking forward to it. I always think about this too. If I were to go into battle as often as these guys did, I think pretty much every time I would say to my friend, I think this is it. And one of those times I might be right.
That's right.
Right? And that's the one they remember and tell to everybody.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. I mean, read the letters of Edward Cross,
Colonel Cross.
Colonel Cross. Remember, he has a premonition before the Battle of Gettysburg that he's going to be killed. And who is it? Hancock says to him, General, this is your last battle without a star.
Yes.
And he says, no, this is my last battle. And he takes off his black bandana. He puts his red bandana. He puts his black bandana on. Colonel Cross has a premonition of battle a premonition of death before every battle. You can read that in his stuff.
Did he change his bandana before every battle too?
He was wounded like 13 times. I mean, he's right too. He's getting shot all the time. So, I mean, I'd be afraid before every battle.
Sure.
And I'd have a feeling that, is this going to be my last battle? I mean,
exactly.
I think the only way to determine the correct answer in something like this is if we were to catalog all the times when somebody says they're going to be killed and they weren't killed.
Well, and that's the thing.
We don't have that.
We don't have that because somebody back then would have had to say, Tom said he's going to get killed again, yet once again, he survived the battle, But nobody did that.
I mean, the rate of death, percentage-wise in these Civil War battles is just monstrous as opposed to dying in other other battles and other wars. I mean, so
what is the statistic on that? It's like
it's just crazy.
10?
Well, I mean, just take 150,000 men at the Battle of Gettysburg, and we have 50,000 casualties, and it's like a third. That's something bad's going to happen to you.
Yeah,
a
there's
third
a pretty
of the
good
men,
chance
whether you're going to be killed, wounded, or captured.
I think it was 2 out of 10 die of disease. Is that right, Eric? Does that sound right, Eric? To you?
That sounds kind of on the low side.
Does that sound right to you?
I don't know.
Anybody? Does it sound right to anybody?
The disease rate's much, much higher than that.
Because
2.5 out of 10.
For every one that died in combat, there were at least 2 that died, right? So it would have.
Oh, that's what I'm thinking. For every one that died in combat, there are 2 that died of disease.
Something like that.
All right. Listen, this is why math wasn't my strong suit. And I don't want to get any further into this, okay? Somebody out there knows the answer. You can write into matt@addressinggettysburg.com or just put it in the comments section now if you're watching on Facebook. Okay. Joe Jacobs. He says, many years ago, I read an article online that said Lee didn't ride his famous horse Traveler at Gettysburg. Yeah. I don't remember exactly what was said, and I haven't been able to find the article since.
Okay, well, this is this again. I don't know where this started, but this is one that I think I heard in the 70s a lot, and I think again it might be one of those things that that swings on a pendulum. So Lee had multiple horses, and you probably know the Virginia Memorial at Gettysburg,
right?
Is Traveler,
right?
Lee riding Traveler, and Traveler, of course, is his most famous horse. And if you're interested, you know there is a novel called Traveler, written from the perspective of Traveler, by a guy named Richard Adams.
We've talked about that before.
We have?
Yeah, Bob might have brought that.
You guys got to read it.
Really?
Written by the horse. You know, he's like, oh, there's some cannons firing again. Man, look at that big pile of poop down there.
Hey, that's how I would write it.
So
is that really what? Is that really what it says? Like stuff like that.
Really weird. But no, what I think is what's really great about the novel is the horse overhears private conversations between Lee and his subordinates that we don't have access to in other written sources.
So we need to read it to know what was really said. Okay.
But, you know, he has a couple other horses with him. He's got Lucy, or sometimes you call him, I think you hear her called Lucy Long. And then he's got a horse named after the Greek warrior Ajax. And I'm not one of the horse guides. You know, there's a lot of, and I say that, there's a lot of guys that do horseback tours. They probably know a lot more about specific horses. But I will say that when I was in high school, and my high school history instructor had been a former battlefield guide, and he made us memorize the names of generals' horses at Gettysburg. We had a quiz, like where we had to name, 20 horses and who they connected to. So I think because of that ridiculous quiz that most of the people in the class hated, I'm probably the only one
you loved it.
The entire school for 20 years that even uses remotely any of this knowledge. I know most of the general's horses because of that experience. But he has these 3 horses. And this story in the 1970s, like I say, and this is when I first became knowledgeable about other tour guides and what they were saying and the stories they were telling, it became prevalent to say that the Traveler was not at Gettysburg. And the story was always that he threw a shoe. And I remember one of the tour guides would say that Mary Thompson's son was a blacksmith and that he had a source where, Traveler's in their stable and he's trying to, some reason he can't fix Traveler's horseshoe. Okay. I don't remember exactly. So he doesn't have access to Traveler during the battle. But, and it wasn't just me, there was 2 other tour guides at the time and that were into this little controversy. And there are specific accounts. There's one by Staff Officer James Powers Smith. I think he's a staff officer with Mule, but he goes to visit Lee, and he specifically mentions that he's mounted on a Traveler and describes Traveler.
Because Lucy wasn't the same color, right? And what was Ajax?
Again, I'm not so much an authority on these horses. But and then I know Wayne Mott's in Pickett's Charge, just before Pickett's Charge, there's a specific account that talks about Traveler.
Okay.
A soldier mentions him by name and talks about Traveler's appearance.
Okay.
So we do have accounts of Lee on Traveler at Gettysburg. So I would say this is one of those things that propped up as a myth. People started to tell it. That's what happens. A myth comes about, and people start telling it widely, and then it gets around. And then the next thing you know, it's just not. It's not based on an actual
reality.
Like Lee never referred to the Union Army as the enemy.
Those people.
He always called them those people.
That's a myth too?
Well, I mean, unless we're discounting all the official reports of the Robert E. Lee during the war.
Whoa, Tim, you are blowing us away with this here.
Attack the hill occupied by the enemy.
Oh, not those people.
All is lost.
When I've gotten into discussions about this where I showed messages where Lee wrote it, they'll be like, yes, but Lee didn't write that message.
Oh, okay.
That was written by Charles Marshall.
Okay, Marshall put that in there.
That's right.
Lee dictated those people, but Marshall said, no, the enemy.
So, I mean, there's things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I got you. Okay. All right, Spencer Frogner. He was so worried that he didn't make the final cut, but his question is in here.
Well, he sure did.
How did the myth of the number of legs raised on the horses of generals' statues indicate... Wait, hold on. Let me try this again here, Spence. How did the myth of the numbers of legs... Okay, you know what I'm... You know the question is.
We don't know.
Tell everybody...
How.
But tell everybody first what the myth is.
Well, what's really funny about
what the rule is.
What's really funny about that one, and I would say this is probably this is in the top 3 of myths that we get on our tours.
Right.
And it might be number 1. No, I say it's number 2. If you want to know what number 1, we haven't talked about it yet, but number 2. So it definitely started at Gettysburg. There's no doubt about it.
Okay.
At some point, Gettysburg tour guides started to tell people that as you drive around the battlefield, there are several equestrian statues, depending on how you count, right?
Right.
7 or 8, 9, depending on how you count. And you can tell the outcome or the fate of the rider by looking at the number of horses' hooves in the air. If the horse has 1 hoof in the air, the rider was wounded. If the horse has 2 hooves in the air, the rider was killed.
Right.
And it was very popular. And the tour guides, told that for years. And as a matter of fact, it became so prevalent that the superintendent of battlefield guides had to, William Storick, had to send a memo out to all the guys to tell them to stop telling the story. And I think that was in the 1920s. They just said, stop it. It's ridiculous. And so it's been in the newspaper. But, the Gettysburg tour bus, double-decker tour bus, they have a tour tape, and they tell that story on the tour tape.
I know.
And so, or maybe the bus driver tells the story while the bus is sitting in the parking lot. I don't know if it's part of the tape anymore.
Maybe.
But, and some tour guides, I know one tour guide who's an incredible tour guide, does a really good job, and he still loves to tell the story. Because he says that, especially with kids on this tour, they'll be like, oh, look, he wasn't wounded, or, oh, look, But
could it be, though, Tim, that maybe when it started, it's, how people don't listen to the words or people don't choose their words correctly, but sometimes the listener isn't listening closely to the words used. And could it be that it started with the guide saying that, and if you look at the hooves of the feet, or the legs of the horses, the hooves of the feet, the legs of the horses, it just so happens to work out that it corresponds with if they were wounded or not, or killed or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could have. The problem is it just got out of control.
It got out of control.
And all the tour guides were telling it. The Henry Kirk Bush Brown is the one who really started the myth, because he did Reynolds. And Reynolds is the only one of those people that has an equestrian statue that was killed in the battle.
Right.
So it really only works for Reynolds, this story.
Right.
Forget about the Hancock one. He's wounded and has a half in the air. So it really only is Reynolds. And Henry Kirk Bush Brown said that when he was sculpting the monument, he had a wager with another friend who was a sculptor that he could show that he could balance this massive piece of bronze on just 2 points.
Okay.
And so he has the 2 hooves in the air, one in the front, one in the rear, and the statue is balanced on those 2 points. Okay. And that's why he did it. And he said in a letter, he says, I never heard of this story about the horse's hooves. It really gets me that when some tour guides, and also historians, James McPherson, for instance, the historian, he tells the story. And he says that this is a military tradition in Europe. No,
Oh yeah, I've heard that too.
Not true.
Okay.
And people try to maintain it's just a story from somewhere else. I read an article about the horse's hooves, not from Gettysburg's perspective, but Washington, D.C. And there are 30 equestrian statues, depending on how you count, because, maybe one of those is not standing anymore.
Right.
But depending on how you count, there's like 30 statues in D.C. It does not work on 20 of them, the story.
Okay, well, that sounds like most of them. But again, I'm not good at math.
Then when people would say, well, it's only meant to be at Gettysburg. You had to be wounded in the spot where your monument is. And then there's a great story in Italy. One of the great statues that has two hooves in the air is, or one hoof in the air, is Marcus Aurelius in Rome.
Yep.
And his horse has a hoof in the air. And I think they say there that they did it because originally there were the enemy was laying on the ground below the horse, and the horse is going to trample over that enemy's head.
All right.
And I had a friend go to Rome, and he, for me, asked the tour guide about the horse's hooves. And the guy said, yes, it means he's wounded in battle. So they were telling the story in Rome, too.
So, but it's that whole thing starts here, is what you're saying?
I think that the thing starts in Gettysburg, yes.
Wow, and it spreads around the world to Rome.
Now everybody knows the story.
To the ancient world.
That's right.
To Marcus Aurelius.
So that's the second, there you go. I say that's the second myth, the second greatest Gettysburg myth. So do you guys know the number one Gettysburg myth that we get almost on a daily
Well, I don't know. Maybe
basis?
somebody's got it already.
Okay.
Is it shoes?
It's the shoe factory.
Oh, man.
All right, go ahead and talk about it since we'll skip that question.
So obviously, again, this myth starts because Henry Heath wrote in his official report that he was coming to Gettysburg to get shoes.
Right.
And he elaborated on it in a book that he wrote after the Civil War, in Henry Heath's memoirs, that, and a lot of people were surprised by this. Oh, by the way, the battle, I needed shoes. I asked if General Hill had any problem if I went to Gettysburg to get those shoes. And, of course, he says none in the world. And so he comes to Gettysburg to get those shoes, and he accidentally starts the greatest battle in American history.
Okay.
Because he was looking for some shoes.
Yeah, wow.
And then, of course, it goes from the story of the shoes to the idea that Gettysburg has a shoe factory. Or Gettysburg has a large depot of shoes.
Well, yeah.
And, of course, we don't.
What?
Yes. So there is no shoe factory in Gettysburg.
Wait a second.
And certainly the idea that the 10 roads lead here and both armies have ordered for the concentration army at Gettysburg probably has a lot more to do with the concentration than the fact that Henry Heath is coming to get shoes.
But maybe all those roads are here so that they could get shoes out to all the different people in all the different areas.
And I think we had private conversations about this.
Yeah.
I would like, at some point with addressing Gettysburg, we'll have our own location in town. We'll have a studio in a restaurant, and then people can eat and drink while they're listening to us. I would love that. And the restaurant will be called the Shoe Factory.
Oh, my God, that's amazing.
And I know where to put it, and we could put it right. So we got 2 restaurant ideas that we got to work on now.
And we have all the servers would be dressed as, Civil War soldiers.
Yeah.
We'd have Civil War fare. And hanging from the ceiling, we'd have, different pairs of shoes all over the place.
Oh, I love it.
And we'd have quotes on the wall, like from A.P. Hill and Henry Heath about going to get the shoes.
Wait, we shouldn't be saying this on the show because now people are going to steal it.
I thought he was going to say the servers were going to be dressed as cobblers, but
that's even better.
That's a good one, yeah.
Leather aprons and all.
Yeah.
Everything would be
peach
themed.
Cobblers and cherry cobblers.
And you know what?
Oh, yes.
Everybody would come to the restaurant because everybody would want to see the shoe factory.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And then we can have like a mausoleum right out back to Buster.
No, just his armpit.
Just his bloody armpit. Buster Kilrain's bloody armpit. All right, we got a few more here, so let's get to them here. Okay, this is another one from Spencer. Have we reached a point yet in research of the battle that the copse of trees being the guide of Pickett's charge is becoming less factual and more mythical?
No.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, I mean, I think the copse of trees being the aiming point of Pickett's charge is based on some pretty good source material.
Have you read Scott Hartwig's essay on the matter? from years ago. I think
which
it was,
one?
Well, that's the one we just interviewed him on.
Yeah,
that.
but he wasn't here for that.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, he basically says that the idea that it's a myth is malarkey because there's plenty of evidence from the participants that no, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. We got there's a good comment. There's a good quote from Longstreet to John Batchelder that's printed in his 1870 book on Longstreet's assault, and of course in when is that book published? But Harrison's Men. Pickett's Men by Harrison. I don't know why I said Harrison's Men. Pickett's Men by Harrison, a staff officer. He tells the story in the book. So, there's pretty good evidence that the clump of trees is the aiming point in Pickett's charge.
All right. And the tale of William J. Barbie at Devil's Den.
Cool.
Is this story an example of fact being stranger than fiction?
No, I think it's a good story. I think the problem with the story of Barbie is when you read all the accounts, most people tell the story as if Barbie's at the base of the triangular-shaped field, and this event is occurring while the Northern Army still had possession of Devil's Den.
Yeah.
And I think when you read the actual account, it's clear that this event occurs after the Southern Army captures Devil's Den, and the Southern Army is on top of the hill, and they're firing up like a little round top. But I find the two versions of the story are pretty good. And you can exaggerate the story, I guess, but basically the story is that, is it William Barbie?
He has William J.
He's I think he's a courier. He's with the 4th Texas, and that company happened to be on the skirmish line at Devil's Den instead of on Little Round Top. And during the fighting, and after the South captures Devil's Den, he climbs up on a rock and he's firing at Union sharpshooters, and he's hit and he falls off, and he climbs back up on a rock and he asks somebody to hit him another rifle, and then he's firing and he's shot again and he falls off the rock, and they're like, "Hey, we're not going to put you back up there." He's begging them to put him back up on the rock because he wants to shoot at some more Yankees. So I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen anybody say that story. We know that Barbie's at the battle. We know he's wounded during the battle. So, where does the myth part come in? That it's just a embellishment of the valor and gallantry of the Texans.
I think the myth part is he keeps getting back on top of the rock. Okay. Because if you read Colonel Work's after action report, it says he's up there, he fires like 25 rounds until he gets wounded in the right thigh, falls off the rock, and then that's it.
That's it.
Okay. Like he doesn't say anything else about it.
Okay. So the myth part is that he continues to be put back up on the rock, and
so then this is
going back up, shot up more and more.
So then we could say that in Spencer's word that it's Texas yeehawing.
Yeah, but it's based. It's not like the guy didn't do it.
Right. All right. This one is just to make Matt's eyes roll. The ghost legend of the triangular field. Why is it just this place on the battlefield that gets the tale of no cameras work properly here, that all electronics have glitches here? Why not Little Round Top? Why not Culp's Hill? Why not the wheat field? Why not blah, blah, blah?
I thought it had something to do with magnetic disbursement of the triangle itself, like the Bermuda Triangle.
There you go. That's another one. If we change the shape of the field, does that make everything work again?
That's right.
Have you? Let's go around the room. Veronica, have you had electronics or cameras not work there? No. Tim, you?
No.
Eric, you?
No.
Nor I.
You know what? And you know what's really funny about that? Your cameras hardly work anywhere.
That's a fair point, actually.
Our cameras don't work in the Adams County Historical Society. The batteries drain like that. I think that place is haunted, if anything. But Devil's Den, I haven't had a problem with anything.
So what's really funny about it is Gary and I made a video. We made a video inside the triangular field, like a 45-minute video. We walked down the boundaries and we talked about it. So Gary is fond of telling that story when we did our Devil's Den book. But when I became engaged in, what year would this be? 1993.
Okay.
I had my engagement photograph taken in the triangular field.
Okay. How'd it come out?
And printed in the paper. That's how
it was just black.
That's how like in your face I was about the triangular shaped field.
Now, would you recommend that maybe you don't get your engagement photos taken in the triangular field?
Probably shouldn't just
It's not good luck.
Yeah. It's just as as a general.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like that. I know, and I hope I'm not insulting anybody in the audience who's done this, but I don't like people taking wedding photographs on Devil's Den or Little Round Top it's what do you think? Did you do it? Did you do wedding photos at Little Round Top or something?
No, a good friend, Mike Phipps, who just recently passed away.
Yeah.
Good, huge cavalry expert, wrote a book on Custer and a book on Buford.
No, I know, and we wanted to get him on.
He had his wedding photograph taken in front of one of the Vermont Sharpshooters Monument on Burdian Avenue. And I remember that, lightning hit a tree, and the tree fell on the monument and knocked it over. And I was like, oh, Mike, look. And shortly thereafter, that marriage ended. And it seems like it's bad luck.
It's bad luck to do it. Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope the people that have recently done it have good luck. I wish you all the best, but it doesn't bode too well for you. All right, Aaron Martin, he says, hi, Matt. I'm a new patron. Thank you, Aaron. Welcome. And I just wanted to say that you're doing great work. Thank you, Aaron. Welcome. And keep it up. You're welcome. I will. My myth is one that my dad always used to tell me when he would drive past the Trossel barn. He always said that Sickles was inside the barn at the time of his wounding, and that the hole in the side of the barn was created by the ball that hit him. I've never heard this one. I'm wondering, was this a myth that was ever circulated, or was this just something my dad made up?
That's I can't say for sure, but I've never heard that either. That sounds like something my dad would make up, so I'm gonna guess that's a dad story.
Yeah. Well, this is all too perfect. The cannonball, and he's inside, boom.
Dads do have stories, and I think the important thing here, though, is that you have to be very careful on tours, because I've been on tours before, and a little kid will say, like, my dad told me that, and his dad's
your dad's an idiot. And then his dad's right there, and you're in big trouble.
Yeah, you don't want to. You don't want to destroy, the dad myth.
Right.
So.
Do you get that a lot? I know this isn't about tour guiding, but I just always wondered this. Do you get that a lot, where you have a show off on a tour, wants to impress his kid or his wife or girlfriend, or he'll finish your thoughts, or
sure.
Yeah. How do you handle that? That would drive me nuts.
Yeah. Well, I can be anyone's best friend for
money.
2 hours.
Yeah, I could do it too.
And then, I'll never see him again. So.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I usually let him go. It depends. There are definitely people tell you that about me. There are definitely little teeny things that you wouldn't expect that just set me off.
Yeah, like what?
If they criticize General Meade at the end of the tour, if they say that General Meade was fired after the battle, then that just sets me off.
Or what if they say, "Oh, I don't understand why General Meade just didn't go chase Robert E. Lee and finish him off."
I know.
And what do you say to that?
Well, I try to, be diplomatic.
And then after you give your answer, they go,
well,
"Yeah, but come on."
If I'm really going to be critical, if I'm, and of course you got to be. You don't want to criticize the people asking the question.
No, you want to be nice.
Yeah. But I'll point out, well, how come General Grant didn't force the Lees to surrender at the Battle of the Wilderness?
Well, I never heard of the Battle of the Wilderness. I'm here at Gettysburg.
How come he didn't destroy Lee the next day? How come it took him a whole year?
See, when I say things that are like really incorrect, Tim just looks at me sideways and says "cool" and moves on to the next topic.
I'm usually not confrontational. The Joshua Chamberlain stuff does get to me sometimes.
Yeah. Someone sent me a screenshot today. Someone had asked her if Chambersburg was named after Chamberlain. And
cool.
She
there it is. Moving on.
Okay, Chaplain Cox. Yes. Was John Burns wounded 7 times or 5 times or twice?
Well, I think I discussed this in great detail in the book. But
yeah.
First, the answer to that question is they gave John Burns a special pension without having a medical examination first. So in his pension file at the National Archives, unlike millions of soldiers that applied for pensions that have to go through these rigorous medical exams with these forms and these pictures to show where they're wounded, we don't have any of those for John Burns, and we don't have a medical explanation of his wounding. So in point of fact, I guess, we do not know how many times he's wounded. Clearly, he's shot in the ankle, and because of that wound, he falls to the ground and he can't move. And so we know he's shot once.
Okay.
But there are accounts that he shot 2 times. There's an account that he shot 3 times. There's an account that he shot 5 times. There's an account that he shot 6 times. And he himself, in several accounts, one in 1864 says he shot 7 times. So from all this, I conclude that he was not wounded 4 times.
Okay. All right. He also wants to know, did he fall asleep? Did he really fall asleep sitting next to Lincoln at church? I
would say yes, he did. And, when I was working on the John Burns book and I'd come across that story, in the John Wayne Johnston papers in Rochester, New York, there was a letter from, I think it was either Alice Powers or her sister Jane Powers to John Wayne Johnston. And she was upset because her sister had told John Wayne Johnston the story that he had fallen asleep. And Johnson blew her off. And he didn't want his hero to have, fallen asleep sitting next to Lincoln during this important event. And he tried to hide this fact. And she was livid about it, about, hey, this is what happened.
Right.
You asked us what happened, we're telling what's happening, and now you don't like it. Why can't you just tell the way it happened and have to keep changing stuff? So I tend to think that it probably did happen.
Yeah, I mean, and think about it. It's only a few months after you've not been shot 4 times. So you'd be pretty tired, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't really diminish from, I'm sure lots of people fell asleep during these long-winded addresses given by some of these people.
These preachers.
That was like a 2-hour speech by Lieutenant Governor-elect Charles Anderson of Ohio.
Yeah, that had to be boring beyond all boredom. Yeah, I would have fallen asleep too. Tim D wants to know, did the Mule Train charge of July 1st really happen, or is it made up?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, that story comes from the National Tribune. And basically, I think he's talking about how an ammunition supply is redistributed to Baxter's brigade on the backside of Oak Ridge on the afternoon of July 1st.
Right.
So, I think I don't mind these stories that you come across where there's only one source that gives the information for the story. I think definitely Baxter's brigade, if that's the brigade that I recall we're talking about, fired all their ammunition into Iverson's men and were pulled back and put into that position in reserve. But some of these stories are very colorful. And to me, it doesn't really matter if the story is true or not. That's the story that this veteran told. And we can preface it by saying, hey, this story was told. At least it comes from a legitimate source.
Because whether it's true or not, now the story is entered into the historical record, right?
But I don't know if I'd be using, that as a source of it depends on what context you use the story in, I guess, is what I'm saying.
All right. Now, ladies and gentlemen who are watching live, if you have any questions, get them in now while we do this last question here. From Dan Pacala. He says, I hope you're doing well. My question is, why does Tim have to go and ruin all the best stories with the truth?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I...
He was kind of joking there.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel like I'm ruining the stories. I like to put the stories, I don't like to destroy the myths. I like to put them in some kind of context.
Yeah, he's just educating you. He says, I was so crestfallen when I learned, and this was from the Barlow's Knoll episode, I was so crestfallen when I learned that the Lieutenant Bayard Wilkinson story about him amputating his own leg was not true.
Yeah.
I'm joking, of course. No, he's not joking. He meant it. It was very upsetting. But maybe you could speak to that about the story of Bayard Wilkinson. Did he cut off his own leg? Why didn't he? How did it all go about?
Well, the story is Lieutenant Bayard Wilkinson in command of, what is that, company Battery G, 4th U.S. Artillery, wounded on Barlow's Knoll. His horse falls on him. He's, hit in some form or fashion in the leg by the artillery shell, or the leg is greatly damaged during the fall. And the story is he pulls out his pocket knife and amputates his own leg, crawls out from under his horse. And eventually, later, he dies from loss of blood. Well, it appears as if when you read all the sources associated with the story, that he uses the pocket knife to tighten a tourniquet around his leg and his damaged leg to stop the flow of the blood, but he doesn't get the tourniquet tight enough, and eventually he bleeds out. And all the sources that you find about the story, none of them mention that he amputates his leg with a pocket knife. But then again, we have to think of a tour guide. In this case, an unlicensed battlefield tour guide, not a licensed battlefield guide, but a guy named J. Howard Wirt.
Oh.
And
the professor.
Yeah, J. Howard Wirt is well known for creating, elaborating on factual information to make the story a little bit better.
Okay.
And he is the one who kind of tells the story that he amputated his leg with the pocket knife, not that he uses the pocket knife to tighten up a tourniquet around his leg to stop the flow, the flow of blood. And then in the 1970s, I believe it was, the Time Life series came out. Mm-hmm. And as part of the illustrations in the Time Life series of the Civil War in the Gettysburg book, they used the Craig Haba collection, which is the J. Howard Wirt collection, and they showed the pocket knife, and they told the story that he amputated his leg with his pocket knife. So it got renewed attention from the Time Life series, and that's when people tell it today. That's what they're referring to. They read it in that book, and they actually have a picture of the pocket knife that apparently J. Howard Wirt somehow got from the body of Wilkerson or from somebody who was at that field hospital afterwards and had as part of his collection.
He stole it.
He somehow acquired
it.
J. Howard Wirt was a collector of that kind of, he would go around and collect what he would consider important artifacts from the battle and from local history.
Wasn't Bayard's father here writing?
Yeah, Samuel Wilkerson was, and you got the New York Times there. He's a correspondent for the New York Times and is probably in there, and he reports the battle for the New York Times from Meade's headquarters, afterwards, and he goes and visits to try to find his son on July 4th and learns that his son is killed.
Does he write his dispatches from the freshly dug grave of his son?
Yeah.
He is sitting by his son's.
Well, that's what it's
another Ken Burns
thing. So to speak, in his account that he does mention that he is, he can't, it's hard for him to concentrate and write about the battle when his
baby boy's dead.
Eyes are transfixed on a central figure in the battle, the dead body of his son.
And he's very critical, isn't he?
Yes.
He's very angry.
He's very, very angry with Howard and Barlow for moving out to that knoll and having an artillery unit placed on there. Initially, they were placed back, if anybody knows, like the Adams County National Bank or the ACNB Bank, back on the rise of ground a little bit farther, and then are pushed out to that rise of ground where then, of course, they don't know at the time when they move out there that the Confederates are Jones's battalion is going to open up all that artillery fire on his flank.
How could they possibly know that? But do you think that might be kind of, I wouldn't say maybe not the start or the cause, but a big contribution to the bad rap that Howard and the 11th Corps gets from the bad press from Wilkerson?
Oh, and I don't know. Wilkerson's bad press, to me, seems to be directed against the high command of the 11th Corps. When, as time goes by, both Barlow and Howard are able to dodge that bad rep
by blaming
the men themselves. The poor German soldiers get to end up getting in the bad rep.
Okay. All right.
Let me tell you this story that associated with the 11th Corps that I heard. I maybe have mentioned on the podcast before. I shouldn't be hesitant to retell stories.
No, that's fine because it's not always the same people. Yeah.
But when I was a kid, one of the stories I heard told by tour guides was that the Union soldiers, the First Army Corps veterans that fought on July 1st, had blamed the 11th Corps for their horrible defeat. they were driven back, and the Union Army then had to retreat off of Seminary Ridge, so it was the 11th Corps' fault. And they were so bitter about it that after the war, they went home and they carved the symbol of the 11th Army Corps into the doors that are outhouses.
Oh my.
You're supposed to say, cool.
Hang on, let me see if it works if I do it. Cool.
And the next question. That is good, though. That is good. Ricky Fowler. Let's get to some of the live listeners here. Ricky Fowler. What is the truth to the Masonic story behind the Friend-to-Friend Monument, if there is any?
I wonder what he's getting at. Is there some kind of? Is this like?
I think it's
Brown and conspiracy of the Masons.
I'm gonna guess. I don't know, but I'm gonna guess. He's asking about the whole Armistead. Please help a motherless goat or something. Whatever that distress signal is. What was the distress call?
I have no idea.
I'm the son. I'm the son of a widowed mother or something like that. Not a motherless goat. So I think he's talking about that.
Yeah, I'm not a Mason, so I don't know that. But
well, is there truth that he gave a signal?
There is pretty good evidence that when Armistead fell, Armistead was a Mason, and he gave the Masonic sign of distress. Okay. And Masons that were nearby ran over and assisted Armistead and helped him after he was wounded. I think there's pretty good evidence of it, and that's the episode that they're illustrating on the Friend-to-Friend Masonic Monument there in the annex of the Soldiers National Cemetery. And I think the Masons who. One thing you got to remember about that monument, the annex of the Soldiers National Cemetery was not in very good repair, and it didn't have a fence around it, and there was no central plaza, and there was a parking lot at the base of it, and it was just being used by the business on Steinway Avenue, and the annex had never really been beautified in any way, and the National Park was looking for someone to help them raise money to help beautify that part of the cemetery that had never been addressed before. Since it was added to the existing cemetery, it just wasn't very aesthetically pleasing. So the Masons came forward and said, hey, let us put up a monument. And you know what? We'll build a fence around it. We'll put a plaza in. We'll put a flagpole. And so the Masons restored the annex, or actually for the first time improved the annex of the cemetery, and then put their monument at that location. I think, and they spent a considerable amount of money beautifying that part of the cemetery. And
the monument is depicting, of course, the historic moment between Tom Chamberlain and Louis Armistead, correct?
Yeah. So it was interesting to me that if I'm not now, and again, there's more. I'm sure there's other people that are bigger nerds on the movie than I am, but that stunned me in the movie. In the novel, I don't recall that Tom Chamberlain in the novel is the one that runs over and assists Armistead. I think that surprised me that they threw that in there in the movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember.
So some people check me later and look and see if that part's in the novel.
Do you have the novel with you, Veronica? See, you know what? I should keep a copy of it here. I have a copy of it. I should keep it here.
So I think that was added and I thought that was, looking back on it, wow, that was interesting.
Well, it was also kind of silly that they had Chamberlain report to Hancock.
Yeah, well, that was in the novel, though.
Yeah,
that was in the novel.
No, I know, but I see what you're saying. It was silly that. But yeah, I don't remember how they had it in the movie. So there's
things that are in the novel, and then there's things that are only in the movie that aren't in the novel.
The point I'm trying to make that I was hoping that you were going to correct me on was that it is not Tom Chamberlain and Armistead, but it is Armistead.
Yes.
And what is the real story?
Major Henry S. Bingham.
There you go. Okay.
Who was the, if I remember correctly, is the staff officer with Hancock who runs over and speaks to Armistead. And Armistead asks about Hancock, and then gives him some
personal effects. And of course, according to Bingham, says something like, "Tell the general I've wronged my country." And Wayne Motch, who's the foremost authority on Armistead, doesn't buy that Armistead at the last moment in his life, after he's trying to kill all these Yankees, is gonna like apologize or take it back. That sounds like propaganda. Griffin Grasso, he says, I've heard a story about when Barksdale died. His wife came to collect the body and brought his favorite hunting dog. Supposedly, the dog would not move from the grave and eventually died because the dog refused food and water. Oh, poor thing.
And now his soul barks out, cries out for, you hear him barking.
Some say they hear dog howls at night around Barksdale's wounding site.
Yeah, I think this is a ghost story.
Yeah, it does sound like a ghost story. And as you know, Griffin, on this show, ghost stories do not fly. We do not allow them. We tell those ghost stories to get out, and they flee like Bo Brinkman in the movie.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Does Bo like that?
Yeah, I make fun of him for him.
Yes, sir.
I got that one, and I got...
Yes, sir.
Oh my God! Stop.
But yeah, no, that's a ghost story.
Let me mention that at the Adams County Historical Society, I just in the last couple of months, I think I've gotten 2 letters from. There's a guy writing a biography of Barksdale, and he's been doing a lot of research on Barksdale, and so I can't wait till his biography comes out. So keep an eye out for that. I don't remember the guy's name. I'm sorry, off the top of my head.
Well, hopefully there's not too many Barksdale biographies coming out, so it should be easy to figure out who you're talking about. Michael Stump. He says, origin of the name Devil's Den, Little Round Top, named after the Little family.
Oh, cool.
Who were the Big family. Gary Edelman favorite, if I am correct.
That's my story.
Oh, okay. This is Tim.
Gary stole that story from me.
You know what you could do?
That's good. No, I think Gary does relish that story. So basically what happened was I found this letter, and it was in the Gettysburg Times, and I think off the top of my head, you could look, I'm sure I have it in my Devil's Den book. You could search through and find the reference for this. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking it's around 1938 during the 75th anniversary, where it's an article published in the paper, and there's this lady, and she says that people in Gettysburg have it all wrong, that Little Round Top is not named because of its closer proximity to a bigger hill, that Little Round Top was owned by her great-grandfather, Ephraim Hanaway Little.
Boy.
And it's named after their family, Little Round Top. And sure enough, I researched this lady. Her relative is Ephraim Hanaway Little. Mm-hmm. But his grandfather is Ephraim Hanaway, who owns Little Round Top. And the Little connection is another part of her family that ties in with Ephraim Hanaway Little. So she is, in fact, related to the person who owned Little Round Top, but his name's not Ephraim Hanaway Little, it's Ephraim Hanaway.
Okay.
And
this is before he got married.
She just kind of gets the story all discombobulated. And so after I tell the story in the Devil's Den book, and at the end, as a joke, I just threw in there, now, if we can only figure out who the Big family that Big Round Top is named for, we'd have it all figured out.
All right, I got you.
Gary does love that story. He's right.
That's it. That's all the ones.
That's all the questions we've got there. All right. Well, so we're gonna get going now for the podcast. Thank you all for listening. Those of you watching, stick around for a bit. I want to talk to you about something, but. Podcast, we're going to get going now. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you to our patrons for sending stuff in. Don't forget, if you'd like to take a tour with Licensed Battlefield Guide, just send an email. Actually, pretty soon, you're going to be able to book them directly on addressinggettysburg.com. But until then, Matt at addressinggettysburg.com, and I will try to get you in touch with whoever you want to get in touch with. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Veronica, for being in the Peanut Gallery this evening. Thank you, Eric, as always. And thank all of you for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, forsooth 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail, no man forget shall go to jail from Gary Owen